This is the meeting of Corporate Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, 9th of January 2024. Item 1, apologies and changes in membership. We've got one apology from Councillor Drew, who's been substituted by Councillor Beston. I'll take the opportunity as well to say I'm just going to reorganise the agenda. So we've got a number of representatives from outside organisations here for agenda item 9, flood response. So to allow them to disappear thereafter, I'm going to bring that up to agenda item 7. So put it above budget proposals and pre-decision scrutiny on future governance. I'll also take the opportunity to give notice that I was given notice of under Regulation 10 of a delegated decision by the Director of Community Services that the annual subscription cost to residents of 102 per annum for green garden waste be agreed, taking effect from the 1st of February 2024. I was required to be notified as chair of this committee, but it wasn't a decision I had any influence in. Right, agenda item 2. Minutes of the previous meeting. Is everyone happy that they're a true record? And if so, do I have a proposer they be agreed? Councillor Quirk, a seconder, Councillor Cook, all those in favour, in which case I'll sign those minutes. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? No, okay. Item 4, public question time. No public questions. We've got a question from Councillor Jarman, which I think relates closely to what was item 7 budget proposals, and I proposed to deal with it then, and I think Councillor Jarman, you're happy with that. It may be a member's question, not a public question, but worth noting now, I think. Fine. Agenda item 5, progress updates, pages 13 to 16. Are we any further ahead on the review of leisure centres? Cabinet member for College. Yes, Councillor Jones-Evans.
And Happy New Year to you, Chair. Yes, the report is in its final stages of being put together, so hopefully we're going to give it to you very soon.
Final stages sound like it will be very soon. Is that fair, Councillor Jones-Evans?
Yeah, well, I always like to keep a little bit of reserve. You never know, but yeah, it's certainly getting to be completed.
Would it not feed into budget considerations?
The whole service is being everything we do goes into the budget, but the report that you'll be getting will be more of a holistic view as well, rather than specific budget considerations for this for us to consider in February. But of course, there's constant monitoring of the budget anyway. You'd expect.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdale.
Thank you. As a newbie to this committee, can I just ask how long has this report taken and been in process of actually getting to a new proposal? How long has it taken?
I mean, some time. I've got meeting date here, 10th of January 2023. So a year.
It's I think the important thing to remember is that you've got the correct information, up-to-date information, and there's obviously the whole service has been recovering from the pandemic, so things do change a lot, but it's all going really well in the right direction. We're going really well. So if we're making decisions around a service, you have to have up-to-date information.
Councillor Mosdale.
Sorry, can you just note for the record that my opinion on that is if you were in the private sector, it would and you had a service that you would expect a report to be done in less time than a year, and just to say that it's going really well will not be sufficient as we're getting up to budget. So I do think it's really important that it's finished, and it should take less time in the year. You would not be able to do this in the private sector. Thank you.
I agree, and particularly as well that you don't have a date or a suggestion of a date for when it will be completed, Councillor Jones Evans, which possibly takes me to another issue as well. Is the heads of agreement in relation to Kingston Marine Park? That's nearly a year of ongoing discussion, presumably. Are we any further ahead with that?
Had a very constructive meeting with the Medina Studios in November, and yeah, things are moving ahead really well. They've got a lot of support, and yeah, pushing their plans forward. So yeah, it's all going really well. So again, as soon as we have all those details, you'll have them. Doesn't mean that things aren't happening.
Yeah, nearly a year later from when this committee was told it couldn't see certain details in relation to the proposal because it was confidential, because the prospective buyers didn't want to be named. They named themselves 2 days later, and a year later, we still have no heads of terms, let alone an agreement. Does cause me slight concern that that's not going anywhere. But
I think the most important thing is that the studio happens, and that we have this massive investment into the island, into jobs, the supply chain, and just our general profile. I think that is the prize, isn't it? That's what we want to happen. I'm guessing everybody wants that to happen.
I agree.
And that's what we're working towards.
I agree. If it takes a year just to put together heads of terms, I fear how long it will take to ever come to fruition. But thank you, Councillor Jones
I think
Evans.
the whole world's had a bit of a traumatic year, hasn't it, really? With things.
Thank you.
There's been delays in many things.
Yeah, certainly have, nearly a year.
A lot to me to have the support of this committee, though, for the whole project. Thank you.
The third item here, update. The committee requested the corporate plan refresh comes to corporate scrutiny when available. And any update on when that might be available?
Chairman, if I may. I'm aware that the leader has been in discussion with his portfolio holders around reviewing the current corporate plan with a view to bringing forward a plan shortly. I have not yet had view or visions that have been made.
And a review on the floating bridge. So this is September 2023. Said review looking to be completed within the next couple of months. Any update on that? Mr. Rowland.
Yes, Chairman. There is a review due, but we're actually combining that with a potential proposal for the future. So we will be combining the two, which is the reason why the review has been delayed, because we want to basically, it makes sense to put them both together. So the review of the current situation, the current floating bridge, and the proposal to move forward with potential future options.
Thank you. Councillor Love.
Thank you. In previous meetings, we said that we would be receiving a report on the floating bridge from the reviewers. I presume that a draft report or some report has now been received in a timely way. Is that correct? Can we confirm that that's happened?
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's correct. There is a draft report, and as I said earlier, Councillor, we will be coming back with that report together with an options paper for future options. But just to say, in terms of that report itself, what it's saying is the constraints of the current floating bridge don't necessarily allow for any major modifications that would change the performance or the operation of the bridge itself. So the reason, again, coming back to the reason for an options paper on looking at what future options might look like, is to say we either leave the service as it is, or we actually look to what the future options might look like in terms of the service.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk.
if there is a draft report, I understand that the way forward will depend on what's in the draft report and additional thoughts, but why is the draft report so secret?
If you may, Mr. Rowland.
It's not necessarily secret. It's about putting it in the context of what the report findings are, and then looking at what future actions might be taken forward, which the committee will see in due course, and which will be subject to any decisions being made by the cabinet.
Fine, thank you. Last comment, if I may, Councillor Love.
Thank you. I don't want to see a draft because I think it just clouds the water. When the final document is ready for us to review, that's what we need to do. A draft will only confuse the situation now and put unnecessary obstacles there. That would be my view.
Fine, thank you very much. Item 6, committee work plan, the forward plan and the work programme, pages 17 to 38. There was an item I thought might benefit from putting on this committee's agenda next time relating to the let me find it. Yeah, it's on page 13. The integration of functions into upper tier local authorities. That's for cabinet on the 8th of February. So we could put that on our agenda for next time. No one has any comments on that. I'm minded to do that. While looking ahead on agendas as well, as we move into April, May, there's an opportunity to plan ahead now. If there are any bigger issues that any member of this committee, and I'm not asking for an answer right now here, any bigger issues that could do with the time to scope them out, we should think about those rather than simply reflecting on what the cabinet might be deciding on in a month in advance. So have a thought if there are any bigger issues you think should come before this committee in, for example, May, and we've got the opportunity to ask officers to go away and scope out a paper on that. Unless there's anything else anyone can see that they want to put on our agenda for next time on our work plan, I'll move on. Councillor Love.
Not sure, Chair, but I'd certainly like at some point to have a big review of Cross Solent ferry operations. I think that time is coming, given the amount of breakdowns and service disruption and changes that's currently happening. I'd like to see that on the agenda because that's the thing that affects every single person on this island in one way or another.
That might be the sort of thing we could look to scope out and put on the agenda in May, but perhaps you and I and others can talk outside this meeting about that. Agenda item, new agenda item 7, which is flood response. To feed into the Section 19 flood risk report by reviewing previous reports and determining specific questions and outcomes, pages 53 to 64. So this committee had a private meeting in private to discuss flood response in December. I was very grateful to see representatives from Southern Water there, Environment Agency, Island Roads, and of course the council who are here today at a public meeting. Thank you very much for coming. James Brewer has put together a slideshow report that is in the papers at page 53. Mr. Brewer, rather than, by all means set the scene if you'd like to, but rather than going into too much lengthy scene setting, I'd just like to sort of get to it, if I may. Are there any opening remarks you wanted to make?
Thank you, Chair. Probably the only thing would just be to set out the role of the council as lead local flood authority and some of the responsibilities that the council has that come with that, and then that probably leads into a bit of a more open discussion then about some of the questions that are at the front of the paper. So in our role as LLFA, which the council's been responsible for 13 years now since it came across the Environment Agency, effectively our role is to carry out investigations into serious flooding, prepare various flooding documentation. So these include flood risk management strategies, asset registers. We ensure compliance with the Land Drainage Act, so that's working with landowners on ordinary watercourses, and also process ordinary watercourse consent applications as well. It's important to note there is a kind of split in responsibility when it comes to watercourses. So, for example, if something's classified as a main river, then the duties of responsibilities fall to the Environment Agency. Where that main river at a certain point becomes a watercourse, it then transfers to LLFA to look out for in terms of those roles and responsibilities around maintenance management of the owner of that particular part of the watercourse. Resourcing of the LLFA currently sits within planning services. We have one drainage and flood risk management officer. As I'm sure everyone's aware, the sheer number and nature of inquiries that we get has increased significantly over the last 2 or 3 years. They're often extremely complex, involving lots of different stakeholders without a real obvious solution to them. And I think that's one of the challenges we all face when looking at this particular issue, is that there isn't often a simple solution to solve it. So I think the partnership working, which hopefully we're going to talk about a bit more tonight, is absolutely vital when we think about how we can address this moving forward. There's lots of bits and pieces going on with the LLFA, which is obviously in the slide pack, which people can read, but probably I'll leave it there and just mention that as LLFA, we've done a lot of joint working with other agencies over the last couple of years, including Southern Water, Environment Agency, looking at some of the potential projects and solutions that can be delivered. And I guess it comes down to things like funding and those aspects as to whether some of those can come forward or not. So I'll leave it there and perhaps then just pass back to you, Chair, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Brewer. You posed 3 very good questions in your slideshow, and I think I'm going to read them out actually for the benefit particularly of those online. Question 1, how is the Isle of Wight Council in its role as local lead flood authority responding to the flood events of late October, early November 2023? Question 2, when is the Isle of Wight local flood risk management strategy going to be reviewed and updated? And question 3, how are the Isle of Wight Council, Southern Water, Island Roads and the Environment Agency working together to address flooding on the Isle of Wight? Just looking at question 2 about the flood risk management strategy. I think on several pages into your report or your slideshow, it says that it's on hold at present, and that also relates to the preparation of a supplementary planning document. What's the reason for it being on hold, and do we have an expected time when that might start moving again?
So the flood risk management strategy, so this is a document again which LLFAs are required to produce. I think the last version was done in 2015 on the island. We'd commissioned work late in 2022 on an update to that document through consultants JBA, who've done a lot of kind of flood work for us in the last couple of years. So the first draft of that kind of revised flood risk management strategy is complete. However, given the events of October and November and the 2 storms, it's felt prudent just to pause on the next part of that document and make sure that it picked up some of the issues that were apparent from those storms and responses that are being made to them. The next stage in that flood risk management strategy is an element of public consultation. So before that document goes out to that, we wanted to complete some of the other work that we're doing, which I'll come on to now. So following the storms in October, November, obviously the first kind of response, if you like, was the handling of the government's flood grant, which certain properties were eligible for. So a lot of people from around the council were involved in taking that forward. We also, at the back end of last year, started an evidence gathering for Section 19 investigations. So the closing date for that was the 22nd of December, just before Christmas. And so basically all the evidence we've collected in that process will help make sure that what we've got from that is reflected in the flood risk management strategy. So we're not put something out to public consultation, which perhaps doesn't reflect some of the recent incidents we've had. So that's the reason for the slight delay on the flood risk management strategy.
Yeah, Thank you. Just on that, and that seems like a reasonable reason, given what we saw in late October and early November. But it would be nice to think also that it wasn't on hold for too much longer, given the previous versions, 2015, and this particular work started in 2022. So in the next 6 months, I mean, does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a catch-up session with JBA on Tuesday next week to look at all the evidence they've had submitted. Obviously, we've got all the 220 odd properties who've applied for flood grant, the 70 odd businesses as well. So all that information goes into that mix, if you like. And one of the decisions will be where we potentially carry out dedicated Section 19 investigation on the island. Obviously, we know we've had some done previously in 2022, sorry. So we look at whether there's other areas we need to do those. And then again, we can make sure that that flood risk management strategy picks up straight after that as well. So yeah, absolutely, that timescale works.
Thank you. And does the same reason for delay apply to the supplementary planning document as well?
Not necessarily. So the SUDS SPD is just being finalised in its first draft, and obviously given other slight delays to the IPS, we've now got a window to potentially get out to consultation in January. So that's what we're looking to do, run that 6-week consultation on the SUDS SPD, and then hopefully get that to Cabinet for adoption, hopefully in March, which then means we can start using it as a material consideration in planning decisions.
Thank you. Please, anyone from the committee sort of chip in or raise your hands, you know, whenever you want. Is that a hand? We have got a hand. Councillor Redrup.
Hi, thank you, Chair. You mentioned about partnership working between the various agencies and the council. Could you give me a sort of summary of what the sort of key learning outcomes there were from October and what's changed?
Yeah, and if anyone from those agencies, I'm very grateful. We have Southern Water in the room and Island Roads and also the Environment Agency online. So if I could direct that question to all people involved. But did you want to start, Mr. Brewer, on behalf of the council?
Yeah, happy to kick off. And I think one of the learning outcomes is that every flooding incident is different. And I think we have different issues in different parts of the island. So, for example, we think about Monkton Mead and some of the issues that happen there. There's different issues at play than there are, for example, in Binstead. So, certainly, no flooding incident is the same, and it often involves all the agencies to work out perhaps where some of the responsibility lies, and often it's shared amongst all of them. There'll be some things that the Environment Agency can do, some that landowners can do, some that Southern Water, some that Highways Authority, some that the LLFA. So it's a real multi-agency response that's needed, and I think that's probably been something that's come to the fore a lot more over the last 6 to 12 months, and will continue to do so through various other things that are going on in the council.
Keith Herbert from Southern Water, thank you.
Yeah, I think my reflections would be that we work closely with the other agencies. We attend site visits on almost a daily basis with colleagues from Island Roads, the council, the Environment Agency to mitigate flood problems. So that's on a kind of site level. On a slightly more strategic level, we attend public meetings together, and we have interagency meetings and walkovers where we have problems with flooding. And then taking up to a higher level, we make sure we give the right responses to consultations where input is required. So from our drainage and wastewater management plan to the island planning strategy or the council surface water management plan, we make sure that we contribute in the right way. I think one of my reflections in response to the question would be that although we know the nuances of which agency is responsible for which type of flooding, I don't think customers necessarily did in the heat of the moment. So when customers were at risk of flooding, they simply didn't know who to call at the right time. So I think interagency, one of the things that we need to feed back and get better at is getting that relayed back to customers who's responsible for the foul sewers, the surface water sewers, the water courses and the highway runoff, because that just wasn't available at the time to customers. I don't think that's through wanting trying from the agencies. I think we just need to look at other ways to get that through for areas that experience repeat acute flooding problems.
Thank you. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of issues. Private meeting. You mean one that happened behind closed doors? Why was that necessary? I'd like to know what that was about, because that was on the 7th of December. So why did there need to be a behind closed doors meeting when this is an issue which has affected absolutely everybody in there? I'd like to know what that's about.
Yeah, well, you could have attended, councillor, I've given you on this committee. It was a briefing not held in public, which all policy and scrutiny committees on this council do in order to help inform this agenda and this agenda item. All of those agencies have come back for this public meeting, so we're able to have a fuller debate, having discussed the issues with those agencies. Like me, I'm sure you have meetings with the Environment Agency, Southern Water and Island Roads all the time. They're not necessarily in public, but I'm glad we're all in public today.
No, I don't. But the point is that this committee had a meeting. I don't agree with these behind closed doors meetings. I've never agreed with them. So I'm just making a point I just don't understand why that couldn't have been in public, so that everybody knew what was going on. But the second point that I want to make is that my residents, are quite concerned. Here we are, several months on, which you quite rightly pointed out, as was said over here from Mr. Herbert, that actually people don't know who to contact, and we don't want hundreds of numbers. We contact this for that, this for that, this for that, this for that. We need one central communication point who we all communicate with. That's a point that I want to make. The other point is that we were told about flood money, flood grants. So today I've heard about one property who's been granted their flood grant, and the properties either side have not been granted their flood grants, and the reason being because they weren't insured. But the whole point of this budget that was allocated from government was to support those people who couldn't get insurance, as many of my residents and those in Ryde can't get because they are in floodplains, and that money was supposed to be there to help them, and it was described as from government upfront urgent monies, and yet nobody's received it yet, as far as I'm aware. Certainly none of my residents have, and it's 2 months on. So what's happening about that?
Is that's presumably money coordinated by the local authority? Okay, councillor Lucioni.
Just to reiterate, and I don't know if Keith knows this, but we've had a leaflet sent out to all councillors with all of those details to send on to residents, which I have. So it gives you all those details about who you need to contact and when you need to contact them. So do get that out to your residents. It's on your email. It came a second copy came through today.
Colin Rowlands.
Yeah, can I just to Councillor Love's first point, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Sharon Betts. There is a leaflet now, Councillor Love, which we got available, which has a phone number, phone contacts, and it's also replicated by the website that actually does provide that information to residents about who they can contact, where they can contact, as well as a phone line, which has links into Southern Water, Environment Agency, and our other partners as well. I'll just hand over to Sharon, to quickly talk about the grant system and the grant requirements.
Oh, it's working now. Yeah, I'm Councillor Love. I'm very happy to take away the two examples that you just talked about. But generally, the local authority is administering the grant scheme on behalf of the government. And the government criteria is very, very strict around the insurance arrangements. And so if unfortunately somebody can't prove, account evidence that they can't get the insurance or haven't tried to get the insurance, then the criteria says that we can't pay them the grant. But I'm happy to take away the two instances that you have.
Yes,
I think it's really quite important that we clarify this, because people were led to believe that that money was there. So if you live in a grant area, my residents have tried everything to get insurance for their shops and businesses and other things. And that money should be, if there's a fault here in the government structure, then we need to be, as a council, reporting that back and saying, this is not good enough, because I've got one property, and I'm going to say it, which happens to be Isle of Wight Council owned, who have got the grant, and then the two immediate properties on either side who haven't got it, and they've had to have their floors and everything ripped up. They were equally as bad. So what we're saying is if you've got insurance, then then that's okay, we'll give you 500 quid. But you people who can't access any insurance because you're in a flood zone, because it's difficult, etc., can't have any money, even though that money was probably intended for them to have. The point is, how am I supposed to be able to get any business to move into my community in the lower end of town if they know that they cannot get any help with anything if they flood? Who's going to open a business in my town, in that particular area, which is the town centre? So I'm not shouting at us as a council. I'm shouting at, there's something wrong here with the way that this budget, with the way that this money is allocated. So those who can't have insurance in the first place because they can't get it, even though they've tried to get it, have missed out. But those with insurance who could make an insurance claim have got it. How ludicrous is that? It's ludicrous.
Councillor, thank you very much. If I could leave you to take up those particular cases.
No, Chair,
for the
it's for
officer.
this committee to take it up with the right authorities, not necessarily just me.
Councillor Redrup.
Off the back of that, would it be possible for us to get some information on how many applications there've been, how many of them have been successful, if there's been any complaints and how those complaints have been resolved, perhaps, for us to review at another meeting?
Sounds sensible. Is that the sort of information we can get? Yeah, fine, thank you. While we've got all the agencies in the room, just looking at question 3 on Mr. Brewer's sheets. How are the Isle of Wight Council, Southern Water, Island Roads and the Environment Agency working together to address flooding? If I can maybe change the question slightly, I mean, what are the challenges? Clearly, 4 or more agencies, there is always a challenge. The more people you that have authority over a issue. But perhaps if I could understand more what the challenges are and how you're overcoming them and what challenges remain as well. I don't know whether someone, Mr. Herbert for Southern Water, thank you.
Go first if you like, councillor. So I think we classify flooding as from our foul water network as twofold. When there's a problem, either a blockage or a collapse, then the answer is quite simple. We fix that and the customer gets back in service and the flooding problem is resolved. The second part of it is when there's hydraulic overload, i.e. there's too much water in too short a space of time. And that's what the bulk of the flooding was this autumn. And our solutions are threefold to that. So first of all, we look at the property, assign the customer a dedicated point of contact to help them out with the pastoral issues that flooding causes, and offer property level mitigation. Secondly, it goes onto a list to attract capital funding. That isn't always forthcoming. Like any organisation, we have to wait and build business cases for flooding. And then the third part of it is what we're trying to do is to change the catchment, to regreen some of our urban areas, to introduce nature-based solutions to soak up the water that would have run out. So the challenge is really is if you look at some of the mechanisms for flooding in Ryde, Cowes, Binstead, it's not one organisation, it's lots of different organisations. So if you take Ryde, for instance, the Monkton Mead broke its banks, it went onto the road. It went into the highway gullies, overwhelmed the foul sewer, and people flooded. So just in that little scenario, you've got the Environment Agency who are responsible for the main river, Island Roads and the council responsible for the highway network, and then Southern Water responsible for the sewers, and then some landowner responsibility together. So that scenario is you don't have one single organisation that can click its fingers and make it happen. I think what the skill is to what we do is make sure that we synchronise our capital programmes, we talk to one another, we apply jointly for funding, and then all the agencies working together will overall be stronger. And that's one of the things that we're trying to galvanise through the flood groups and through the partnership working.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was you, Mr. Herbert, or I think it was you actually at our previous meeting talked about the value of local flood groups in bringing the different agencies together. I think that's interesting. I think that's a good message for councillors actually, because the individual ward councillors, I think, have a role to play in convening flood groups and getting everyone around the table in relation to specific flood problems in their areas. Councillor Lever.
Chair, just kind of on the back of what Keith was just mentioning then, I've had a specific issue an ongoing issue in my ward in Gunville. And like Keith was mentioning, it involves private landowners, which then the water coming off that then affects certain other aspects, which brings together certain agencies. Before this winter, that field wasn't necessarily identified as a potential issue. So I'm kind of just wondering, are we, does work go on to identify, g- given the fact that these weather patterns will likely worsen, become more frequent, does work go on to identify where new risks may occur so that we can, because the problem I've got now is the field is so saturated, it's difficult to now get in to do any work to prevent further flooding. So we're kind of just having this ongoing issue without much being able to be done. So how do we get ahead of that, essentially, is what I'm kind of asking. And it's not necessarily, I'm not expecting a massive answer from anybody right now, but kind of just to raise that.
Rob Gillespie from Island Roads. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. And evening, everybody. Really just to first of all, Keith has covered most of the main aspects very, very well there. I'll add a little bit if you like, but answer your question, Councillor. For instance, in conjunction with the Flood Risk Management Officer and his team, Island Roads also carry out work under the Land Drainage Act to look at these areas as you've described, that either are problems currently from adjacent land runoff and the like, or could be a problem in the future. And currently, certainly our officer is working with about 120 landowners locally on those types of problems in a proactive and collaborative way. Very few of those become an issue where nobody will move and do anything. Most of it is advice and help and illustration of where the problem may lie, and those then get worked on. As Keith has already very adequately said, capacity in these storm situations is the thing that has changed most over recent years, and this is the problem here is significant. It is a problem, as we've seen on the news nationwide, most recently over October, November, and again now for many communities, and it is tragic when houses are inundated. I can only imagine. From a highway point of view, I think we've become very good in developed countries in expecting to be able to use the highway to get wherever we want to go at whatever time we want, whatever the circumstances. And certainly was illustrated many years ago with in the winter time when heavy snow falls, ground everybody to a halt, mainly because we all carried on with our daily lives and tried to do what we normally do. And I suppose that the point I'm making there is in October, November, when I was in Newport on the morning when we did all get inundated, and we all tried to carry on doing what we did. And roads don't become blocked until they're blocked. They can become inundated, but until something happens on them and cars get stuck, then the network can continue to function to an extent. And I suppose my point is, in part of that communication with residents and road users, encouraging everybody to take a view of amber alerts and the likes of warnings that do come out. They are there for a real reason, and they do indicate that there's a potential problem coming. And any little bit that everybody can do to take stress off the network at that time is helpful for the emergency services as well to recover the network.
Thank you. I've got hands up. I've got Councillor Mosler, I've got Councillor Ward, I've got Councillor Downer, and I've also got James Brewer. I've come to you, Mr. Brewer, quickly in response to that.
Yeah, and I think the point I wanted to make was just about education, really. I think what Councillor Lever said in terms of, how can you kind of almost preempt perhaps where some areas are going to happen. And I think it's very difficult to do that, but what we can do is, and that's as a collective, and everyone's got a responsibility for that, is that education point on if you are a landowner and you're in a position where you have land that's adjacent to a highway or properties, then you have a certain amount of responsibility for the water that runs across that land. So if you've got a historic ditch system, has it been maintained? Is it cleared? Are you doing everything that you possibly can do as a landowner to make sure that you're not having a detrimental impact to others? And obviously Island Roads have got their Ditch It campaign, and I think it's things like that which are really important to get out there into a bit more into the public conscious that everyone's got a bit of responsibility for this, whether you're a landowner, a property owner, all the different agencies as well. And I think that's absolutely fundamental to making some improvements.
I'm just Councillor Lever, as your question originally, I think. Go on. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Brewer. It was just because touching on, I guess, the relationship, not necessarily between interagency, but with the private landowners is the bit I'm really interested in at the moment. Is because that's essentially the cause of the big issue I've got. And it's just how do we prepare, make sure that landowners are prepared for that, and also take into account what I was saying before about worsening weather patterns and frequency of that, is ways that people maintained their land in previous years may not now be adequate. So how do we prepare them for how they need to maintain them going forward? Because it's not necessarily their fault if they've just been doing it the same way and it's worked in the past. How do we get them prepared for that in the future? It's again, it's not, I'm not putting that at your feet. It's just, yeah, ways that we can do that as a connected entity.
Yeah, James Brewer.
Yes, very quickly. I think, absolutely. You know, weather is different, even to what it was probably 2-3 years ago, in terms of the intensity of rainfall we get, and different solutions are going to be required. The infrastructure we've got, whether that's underground or on the ground, is not designed for the rainfall events that we get now. So there is that education piece around different things that we need to do and different solutions. And I think the other really positive thing we can do is actually champion good work. So where landowners do good work and it does have a positive impact, get that out there so people understand. Now, we've had a couple of examples of Binstead where there's been some really good work on stream clearance and that kind of thing. And that potentially has a bit of momentum to it and a bit of a knock-on effect that others can then pick up and take forward.
Councillor Luciani, is something you wanted to say in response to that?
Only for the fact I've actually, because we've spoken about Monkton Mead, that I'm actually doing a flood plan with the local residents actually on resilience and how we deal with it on grassroots level. And I think that's a really important part of this learning, that I want to help the community be resilient and actually have a real network around them. So I think that's a really important part to learn.
Thank you. I've got hands up from Councillor Downer, Ward, Mosdell and Spink in that order. So Councillor Downer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask Mr. Brewer about the ditching. How are landowners been encouraged to actually dig ditches around the headlands as they used to years ago? Because a lot of those got filled in. The other thing I would like to ask, two-part question, riparian responsibilities. How aware are watercourse owners aware of those responsibilities? Because it's half of the stream their side and half of the stream the other side, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so second part of the question is often people aren't aware of their responsibilities. That may be because they've come into the land or they've bought the land and they're not quite sure what their responsibilities are. In terms of how we can encourage people to do that ditching work that used to happen, that's simply a question of resources. You know, it's about getting that message out there, getting the ability to go out and speak to landowners, get them to encourage to do that work, and whether that's council, Highways Authority, all the other agencies, have all got a role in it, but ultimately it comes down to having people to do that.
Yeah, I've got a hand up on screen from John O'Flynn from the Environment Agency. So I'll bring you in now, Mr. O'Flynn, if you can hear us.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, loud.
Oh, it's working. Fantastic. So obviously some points have been made about the complexity of flooding and the different organisations involved, and I think the comments made by Keith and James, I would agree with all of those. I guess a reflection about some of the questions that's just been asked, and maybe some of the ways for us to gain that clarity, particularly around things like riparian responsibilities, different actions that different either landowners or organisations like ours can take, and about coordinating those. I think the flood groups are probably a key part of that, and I know that Councillor Luciani's setting one up for RIDE, and we've got people who are involved in those, and we have been working with other parish councils to support that. But that definitely feels like a key way that we can identify local concerns and issues, and possibly local solutions that involve both the agencies involved here and also some of those riparian owners and those local flood groups. And that feels like a way that we could make some real headway, and that helps coordinate. You know, so Keith talked about trying to arrange funding and try and coordinate funding, and those flood groups I think are key to making sure that all of those things come together. The Environment Agency is certainly very keen and have supported those as and when they are being developed and organised.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward's had his hand up for some time. Councillor Jarman's added himself, but Councillor Mosdell, you're extremely persuasive, and Councillor Ward is pointing to you. So go on, go ahead.
I've got to put my head up really for those of us who have rural communities as part of our parish. We know not part of Rye, we're not part of the great big picture, but if you lived in a house in Langbridge, it's going to be just as important to you how we deal with flooding as if you were in a bigger area such as Ryde. I think it would be truly amiss of us not to mention this evening what the voluntary groups like. There is nobody who's on social media who doesn't know how much San Lober and people like that actually work together in those storms, and we're out again. I think we forget that this week we've had horrendous weather again and really bad flooding, and they have been back out again helping. So for me, it would be really important that we talk about the bigger agencies, but if you're in a small property and they're the only people there that's stopping your house from flooding, then I think we need to acknowledge that their support is needed and how we embrace that support, because they are clearing drains that other people can't get to. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Island Roads aren't going out there doing it, but clearly when we're in exceptional circumstances, we need all the help that we can get. So I think that really worth a mention. I'd really like to know what is going on with the fire brigade. In the good old days, my great uncle Les says that when he was in the fire brigade and then the retained fire brigade, the engines would be going out with their pumps and they would be making sure that, we were helping clear. And I know that there is, confusion with the, mixing with Hampshire, but actually we're still the island and we were given assurance if needed, we could sort of think outside the box. So I'd really like to know what we're doing about that. It got to the point in Newchurch that we had parish councillors out helping clear drains in Langbridge. And we talk about education, but there is a saying, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig, isn't it? If you've got a driver who wants to get somewhere really quickly, they're not going to care if residents are clearing the side of the road, and they're not going to slow down, and they're not going to not prevent the issue getting worse than it is. So yeah, I get the bit about education, but sometimes we need to close some roads quicker if we know that the wave effect is actually going to cause flooding to residents. So it might not be that the cars can't pass the road, but actually the wave that they are causing is then causing damage to properties. And I think that's the bit we don't look at. We really focus on the highway network. I get that. But on some of these rural roads, we don't look at the properties that are coming off it and what a car driving fast does. I would like everybody to think that they will drive at a reasonable pace and everything, but it's not going to happen really, however many leaflets and media messages we put out. So that's a few things there for you, Karen. Thank you.
Did Councillor Luciani or Councillor Fuller want to respond? I think it might have been hands up.
Oh, just about the fire service. Just to reassure you, I have brought that up with them, and it's also part of the debrief that hopefully everybody will see soon. But just to reiterate, when we were at the height of that flooding, there would have been nowhere to pump out. Certainly in my ward. That's not to say it wasn't any different in anybody else's. So I have actually brought that up with the fire service themselves, and I'm going to be keeping them. So those one or two, absolutely, yeah.
Councillor Fuller.
Thank you. The storms at the end of October, November, I was in Newport on Joe's patch in Gunville, and it was really, really heartening to see everybody working together. Tash seemed to be in control, but everybody was working. They knew exactly what they were going to do. It worked like a very well-oiled machine. The problem that we have with well-oiled machines is sometimes we can't act against what comes through acts of God. So I think that's important. What Claire mentions about rural areas is really, really important. And I'm glad that Simon's here from IWALC, because I think that there is perhaps a much greater ability to work with town and parish councils here, because a lot of town and parish councils, a lot of residents that were coming to see us in Newport were coming from further afield saying, well, we're in Shorewell, what do we do? We're getting flooded out. The thing is, the flooding went all across the island over that weekend, and it was very difficult to make sure that we could be everywhere that we could. And it did seem quite chaotic. But when you looked at the officers and you looked at Darren Steed's emergency planning team, it did seem to come together really, really well. And I was really impressed. And I'd like to say a big thank you to the officers that were involved all across the island, because again, it was good to see. But I think that there are lessons that we have to learn. I don't think we want to stand still, and I think we need to be able to take those on board so we can make sure that we are prepared for the next backlash of storms, which I'm sure will come in the next few months, few years. The other worry that I have is under coastal protection. We're seeing that stormwater now permeating through to our coastlines. So again, that is something that I am quite nervous about. With freezing conditions this week as well, that may make that situation even worse. We've had the biggest landfall for over 100 years at Ventnor. We are monitoring that. But again, this is one of the effects of the flooding that we've had, the impact that we have on our very, very fragile environment, which is something else we have to have half an eye on as well. So yes, I'd like to thank everybody, particularly James, who has been not only dealing with the island planning strategy, but also with flooding as well. Absolute trooper. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm slightly mindful of time. It's a very important issue, this. I'm mindful of time. I'm going to just take the two councillors not on the committee together, if I may. So Councillor Ward and Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chairman. This has been a very interesting discussion because it's brought out all sorts of things across the board from different agencies. I was particularly concerned about my experiences in Sandown and Moreton Brook, and the county press, thankfully, the article in the paper about what I was doing, and I was inundated from other people who said this is affecting us, so on and so forth. But what particularly worries me is a previous owner of Brading Marshes phoned me, and she said, I am really concerned. She said deliberate acts had been taken place by agencies that have increased the water level on Brading Marshes, and that's why it floods so easily. Now, I don't want to repeat what she said because I don't know if they're true, but it does seem to me that not everything is natural. There we go. And I really do think we need a scrutiny panel to look at this subject in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ward, you and I and others have got a meeting with the Environment Agency over that specific issue, I think. Yeah. Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a point raised by Councillor Downer a few minutes ago, which was about the ditches which are filled in. In the West Wide, we had a very large number of ditches filled in, particularly after the 87 storm. They were filled in temporarily, mostly with the fallen trees along the roadsides, which were bulldozed in or ordered to be bulldozed in by local farmers. Since then, those areas have been tarmacked over and become extensions of the road. So I wondered, from Island Road's perspective, what provision have you got to remove those temporary infills and reopen all the ditches, which used to provide a great deal of protection in the West White against flooding, and now, of course, don't, and the flooding goes down the main roads and even the side roads?
Yeah, and I would add to that, you don't have to drive far on the rural parts of the island during rainfall to see water pouring off fields onto the highways. Mr. Gillespie, and then Councillor Bacon, and then Mr. Herbert.
Magic touch. My father taught me that you learn something new every day. So, Councillor Jarman, thank you. I've learned something new that I didn't know about infill ditches from 1987. When we became working on the highway network on the Isle of Wight, we were presented with a network of roads which were in the size and constraints that they were in. So I would have to say that we don't have any provision for breaking out roads and restoring ditches. That would be my honest answer to you, to your direct question. How we deal with, as the chairman has just said, water running off onto the highway, it's something we don't want, because as soon as water comes off at speed and at volume from adjacent land, it brings with it silt and detritus, which goes into the drainage courses, which may or may not be of a capacity for a storm event. But as soon as they silt up, and so we end up in that cycle of having a drainage network which becomes inoperable quite quickly in those storm conditions. So I've answered your question directly with regard to what resource do we have to restore ditches that were there many years ago. But that's something that we'd have to discuss with all of our colleagues to see how that might be done in the future. I'm sorry, it's not a more a fuller answer for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Councillor Bacon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just Councillor Ward referred to braiding marshes, and you indicated there was a meeting with the Environment Agency planned. I wonder if the ward member for Braiding might be invited to that.
Yeah, not a meeting I convened, but yeah, I'll speak to you afterwards, Councillor
Thank you.
Bacon. Yeah. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build upon Councillor Jarman's point, the Isle of Wight has, in most places, a combined sewer network. So the road drainage, the highway gullers, go straight into the same pipes that carry water from toilet sinks and dishwashers. And I'd argue strongly that that's not the best place for it, because it causes flooding and pollution. So we've got a £35 million programme to take a lot of the highway drainage out through means of ditches, swales, rain gardens, permeable paving, which we are doing to reduce storm overflows. But if you look at the Venn diagram for storm overflows and pollution and flooding, they're very closely overlapped. So we want to accelerate that work into the next funding cycle for water companies. We've asked our regulator for £700 million to spend the bulk of it on these solutions. And I guess what success looks like for us is we have a series of agreed designs from Southern Water and the Isle of Wight Council, so we can almost cookie cutter these approaches across the highway network to not only take stormwater or slow it down out of the foul system, but also use it for flood mitigation purposes as well. So, you know, our view is that stormwater should not go in the foul system. It should be slowed down, and also leave our urban areas with things that are more attractive than what is currently there, and grey solutions. So that's what we hope to do in West Wight. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got hands up on my list from Councillor Spink, Love and Cook in that order. And I think I'll take that as the last three councillor questions for this item. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my question really is appropriate for either Mr. Brewer or Councillor Fuller. And it's this, that fairly recently, Councillor Michael Lilly published an open letter which expressed some concern about, or considerable concern about flooding in his area, and also the impact that allocated sites in the dips for planning might have on that, the impact that that might have on flooding. Is there, following on from that, is there any analysis that is going to take place in that regard? That is the effect of development on allocated sites in the dips and the part that that might play in future flooding.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Spink, and the simple answer is yes. So part of that Section 19 work will be looking at where flooding has occurred, and if some of that flooding has occurred in areas where there's been new development, then obviously that will be part of that investigation into perhaps why and where that's happened. The other thing I would say is that sometimes new development can provide the opportunity to improve the flooding in a particular area. And just thinking about Councillor Lever's particular area, the field in question there has a resolution to grant on it. Part of that is a big attenuation pond to hold the water on the site and hold it back before it gets onto the highway. So, but absolutely looking at that as part of the Section 19 investigations.
Councillor Love.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think a lot of learning has come without any doubt from the events. But I just wanted to respond to a few of the points that were made. Is that, you know, I did ring 999 and I did ask for the fire brigade to come and help us, and the response was no, not unless there's any danger directly to life. Well, how was I to know that people weren't trapped in their properties? And that was the response. And the East Coast fire engine stayed in its cupboard. What we needed was people on the floor. Now, once we got the hub up and running, that worked incredibly well because there was a single point of contact. There was a place to go to respond to it, and that did work really well. And they were all volunteers for those members that came in and did that. And for that, I'm grateful. But it's about how we move forward from here. And I think the other thing is the cost. We haven't really talked about this as a council yet, but what is the cost to this council in terms of what happened in terms of its highways? What's happening at Bond Church? Will that road ever be opened? Is it Bond Church? Yeah, Bond Church. Will that road ever be opened again? I'm not so sure looking at it. And what are the costs of all of that to this council? And what might the costs be in future? Because that needs to be built into our resilience as a council moving forward, because there are clearly going to be more events like this. One of the things that was also quite important to us is we wanted the roads to be closed. You hit the nail on the head, and we were told, no, you can't close that road. Well, previously, us local people who know what the local situation is, we just picked up a couple of benches and dumped them in the middle of the road to stop vehicles from. But now we're told you can't do that without a road closure order, because that's the law. And saying, well, some of these things need to be resolved, and no doubt will be resolved and have to be resolved, because the flooding which came off the vehicles that came off the floating bridge, which continued to operate. And I'm not blaming the floating bridge people because they were further on. They probably couldn't see what was quite happening in the town. That did massive amounts of damage. So there needs to be more coordination. We need to understand what the cost is, and also the offloading of the ferries. The ferries didn't stop. They kept going through deep water. All of that needs to be built into the cost analysis of what this has actually cost us an island and what it might cost us moving forward. Because we do need to put some of those ditches in, which has been mentioned over here, then that has a cost, and we need to know what that cost is. Otherwise, we can't plan moving forwards.
Yeah, and I think with that, there is an issue with the Section 19 flood reports, of course, that they don't come with money to solve the problems they identify. I've certainly seen that in my own ward in relation to 2021 flooding, and it's a frustration. Councillor Cook from Iwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to talk briefly about the role that town and parish councils can play, both in flood response and education to the public on what they can do to mitigate flooding and such forth. It was all a bit chaotic in Ryde, as these things often are. We do have an emergency plan, but that was not enacted, I believe. So, I mean, obviously town and parish councils vary a lot in size, and we're mindful of we don't have actually any obligations in this, but I'm sure that many of us would like to offer support where appropriate, but we need some clarity, some definite plans. And I was wondering if there'd been any considerations to formalising such plans within the Isle of Wight Council. From Ryde's perspective, our officers are already engaged with your resilience officers and other officers to begin discussions on how to better plan for such events at Monkton Mead. Ryde did provide skips and sandbags, but it was very much on an ad hoc basis, sort of like in panic mode, really. So I was just wondering, my question is, can we have some definitive clarity discussions around the roles that the town parishes can play in this situation?
Yeah, and I'd hope Ryde would be an example of good practice, given the cabinet members in Ryde. Yeah, and here's one now. Councillor Lucioni.
Councillor Cook, obviously we're on the same town council, and I know the emergency planning manager has been integral to moving forward. But do you think maybe we should come and speak if we've got capacity to do that and there's nothing going on at the time? Maybe come and speak to IWOC.
I'm sure it'd be very welcome. Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be perfect opportunity to discuss that. And I would, it may be that our discussions at RIDE may provide a framework for other councils going forward as well.
Then in conjunction with that, like a good example, then go down to grassroots as well with resilience with the actual community too. So there's like 3 tiers to that. And I think if that we hit all those, I think we can make a lot of progress, the stakeholders as well.
Keith Herbert.
Yeah, thanks. We're always happy to support any initiative like that, and generally what the agenda or the objective of the group is to first and foremost hold the agencies to account and get that regular momentum of meetings, so there's progress. Then we need the community to be our eyes and ears. So any particular hotspots or issues where there's acute flooding, we need to be made aware of that so we can do something about it. Then on a kind of more personal responsibility level, what the community can do in the event of it, who does what, where the sandbags go, where the vulnerable customers are and how people can help. And to meet regularly and go over those, I think prepares communities a lot better and also helps the agencies out in identifying and solving some of these problems. So that would be kind of my advice, to set one up. And then, I'd also recommend making it almost a formal group with, elected chair, treasurer, or whatever, just to give it that level of formality to help in the engagement with the agencies.
Thank you. That's interesting. Thank you for that. Councillor Luciani.
Do actually have a template for that. I've actually started it in my wall. So anybody else, I've got like a terms of reference and the things that we'll look at. So if anybody else wants any of that, I'll send it to you.
I think I'm minded to wrap this agenda item up now. I think it would be a good idea to perhaps put this back on our agenda in, say, 6 months' time. Seems like a sensible time frame. And that should fit in with you, Mr. Brewer, in relation to the management strategy, flood risk management strategy work that you're doing, and potentially their Section 19 flood reports as well. So seem to be general nods around the room. We can note that for an agenda item in about 6 months' time. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed to all those who've come from the various agencies. You're free to leave. The door is open, and see you again at some point soon. Thank you. So agenda item 8, budget proposals. I have a note or a statement here from Chris Ward, the 151 officer, who can't be with us. I want to actually read some sections from it. Those on the committee should have it on their desks. He just sets the background in the first couple of paragraphs, but it's an update on the provisional local government finance settlement that was announced on the 18th of December. So that's since the last corporate scrutiny committee meeting that Mr. Ward was at. So I'll just read briefly. The headlines of the provisional local government finance settlement are an increase in core spending power of 9.8 million, 6%. This is a government measure and includes expected increases in government grants, council tax and business rates. This is the lowest increase of all unitary authorities. The increase in core spending power comprises council tax 5.2 million, an increase of 5.3%, business rates 2.4 million, an increase of 6.5%. Government funding 2.2 million, being 3.31 million for social care, offset by a reduction of 0.9 million in all other grants, which is an increase of 7.8 million. 7.8%. Council tax is below inflation, and 2% of the 3% relates to the adult social care precept. The business rate uplift is at inflation. On government funding, social care funding was known and previously announced and significantly below the social care pressures that the council faces. The other government funding is a real reduction. Compared to funding forecasts for the coming year and built into the approved 2 million savings requirement, the council's position is 0.4 million or 400,000 worse, as he previously mentions. The continuation of the 1 million of funding that the council secured in 2023-24 for additional costs of providing public services on the island, known as the Island Deal. And he goes on to note his disappointment of lack of any uplift in that 1.1 million. And the remainder paragraphs are there for the committee. I have, but by all means, committee, put up your hand if you want to ask questions, but we are also without the cabinet member as well, which makes it slightly difficult. Actually, I think I'll note my disappointment on that because this is the second time budget proposals have been in the agenda and we've been without the cabinet member. Councillor Jarman, you have a question to Corporate Scrutiny Committee. It's fairly long. You can ask it orally if you want, or the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I would echo your noting that the Assistant Director of Finance, our 151 officer, and the Cabinet Member for Finance have all failed to turn up to a meeting where budget is discreetly on the agenda and is such an important issue for this council. I cannot put it in the strongest terms how unfortunate that is. They're also aware of and have received a copy of the note, which has gone to the committee today as well. So just to focus on that and to move away from the unfortunate situation of them not being here, we had discussions going back to October and November about the budget process for this year. And it rapidly became obvious that the budget itself follows policy, and where there's no alignment on policy, it's very difficult to work together on a budget. The result was that there was a split, and it was quite evident that two budgets were going to be worked on, to be brought before the council this time. One of those is going to be, I assume, although I've no details of it, from the Alliance. The other one will be from other groups who are working together. There have been a number of contributions made to that work on both sides, and we got into the discussion with the 151 officer and the monitoring officer early in that process as to how those two budgets and, of course, any prospective amendments to them would be dealt with. The provision in our constitution to us seemed very clear, that it defines that people can put forward budgets, and budgets are referred to separately, the budget amendments. The wording we tried to follow in the constitution was initially agreed by the 151 officer and in an email from the monitoring officer, how those would be dealt with at the budget meeting in full council in February. We agreed with those comments made at the time. That changed fairly rapidly at the beginning of December when we started to request specific information, and questions were made about the interpretation of the Constitution by all of the statutory officers of the authority. Despite our attempts during the whole of December, it's been very difficult to form alignment on the interpretation of the Constitution. I have to say that the majority of people we spoke to about it within other groups, opposition groups, certainly within the local government authority where we took some legal advice with external legal counsel, and with other people who in other local authorities who put forward multiple budgets, our constitution seemed very clear to us. Having failed to agree an interpretation of the constitution, our 151 officer asked us to again seek confirmation of that interpretation. We've not been able to achieve that. And what we've done is to articulate this evening our common, and I say this is a united position from a number of members, interpretation of the Constitution so that we can move forward with the work which is underway. The document you have this evening presents at the end a series of interpretive statements. We do not believe any of those change the Constitution. They simply enact our Constitution as defined and agreed by our full council. And what we are asking is for this corporate scrutiny meeting and the members of it to agree with that interpretation so that we can move forward to other bodies within the council on that basis. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. I mean, I'm somewhat frustrated by budget setting in this council, but my own frustrations are probably a more political one, that the administration that leads the council, only 13 of them in that group, have taken the decision not to disclose or share early or bring other members into the budget setting process. But that's probably a legitimate, albeit in my view, a poor decision to have made. I think what you're talking about is something more technical around the Constitution. I don't feel as a committee we're in a particular position to sort of interpret the Constitution from a technical perspective, and I don't know what information you've may or may not have been denied. Slightly unsure of how to take it, because I don't think this committee can really give an interpretation. But I do want the opportunity to discuss and debate some of the issues you raise, Councillor Jarman, and I will bring Mr. Potter in at some point. So I've got two hands in front of me: Councillor Mosdell first, and then Councillor Brodie.
So should we put it into sort of layman's terms? Basically, what we want to be given is for the Constitution is to allow us to have the same right and information that the Alliance has as well, to be able to form a full budget, to say this is one budget, this is another budget, and to be given the right to have those discussions and form that budget. And actually, that's being hindered at the moment. And the fear that actually, even if we prepare that, we could get near to full council and then being told that we can't actually present that as a full budget, we have to only put it as an amendment. So what we're looking at the moment is to have that freedom to be able to form a proper budget that gives a challenge, that gives us debate. That's all we're asking, is to say that there are more ideas in the room, and some of us might feel are really good, and actually it gets to that budget process that we can all look at it and make an informed decision. Otherwise, we will be going into full council and only voting in one budget with no other budget as challenge to it. We don't want to just make an amendment. We want to present a full budget challenge, so that everybody can debate, everybody can decide what's good, and then we can move forward with that. But that's not easy when you're being not given the information or spend more time arguing whether you can have the information. I'm not being funny. As a council taxpayer, I think everybody should have as much information as they should, and it shouldn't be any behind closed doors. I know Councillor Love would definitely be banging on that drum. You know, if the information's there and the access to officers, we should all have that right to have it, whether you are in the controlling 13 or not.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sort of unsure whether the criticism is the Constitution is not being followed, or the Constitution is a problem in and of itself, and it may be a combination of both of those things. But I'm probably, as chair of this committee, and this committee is not in a position to make a judgment call on whether the Constitution has been followed. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak. Can I firstly just make a correction to what you said from the chair, that the budget process is being limited to 13 councillors. That isn't actually correct. If you will recall, or certainly your leader will recall, depending which one it was at the time, the new leader of the council invited all members of the council, all groups of the council, to participate in formulating a joint group budget. That was declined by the Conservative group. It was declined by the Empowering Islanders group. It was not declined by the Liberal Democrat group. It was not declined by Councillor Quigley, and it wasn't declined by me. I have to say that since then, I have decided to pull away from that, because I'm not convinced that I'm getting
all of the information that I require, but I have certainly had information shared with me that I hold in confidence as part of the time that I was fully engaged with that. So I think, I mean, doing the numbers, it's still a minority of the council, as you've probably totted up. It's 19 members potentially around the table with 20 opposition members, you know, doing their own thing. In terms of what Councillor Jarman has raised, there is absolutely no doubt to me that he is correct. I say that as somebody who won't necessarily support any budget that comes from a Conservatives or the Empire Islanders group, but it's certainly clear to me that constitutionally all political groups and all councillors have an absolute right to information, to confidentiality, to staffing resource and all the rest of it that you would expect as an administration. And if it is the case that that is happening, it is extremely disappointing and is an example to me of why, and I can't resist saying this, why cabinet governance of this council is leading to increasing levels of a lack of transparency and accountability. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Councillor Brodie, and for your comments on the 13. I think to give some context to my comments as chair of this committee is that we put the budget proposals as back-to-back agenda items for our committee and invited debate and contributions, and we don't have the cabinet member responsible for leading the budget at this committee, and that's happened twice in a row. And we're limited to the section 151 officer giving us updates on government announcements. I would have hoped, and the intention was that this committee is more involved in the budget setting. But I take your point. Thank you.
If I could just say, I absolutely agree with you and Councillor Jarman. It is disgraceful and something I've never experienced in my 19 years on this council, that a finance lead on the cabinet or executive, whatever it's called, isn't available when the budget is on the agenda of scrutiny. And as some members will recall, not many are left, I have chaired this committee twice in the past. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I will bring Councillor Bacon because I think that was in direct response there, and then it will be Councillor Spink, Quirk, and Love. Councillor Bacon.
I'm sorry to cut across, but I think before anyone else makes any comment, Councillor Stevens is not here because of family difficulties, personal matters. I'm sure he would be here if he was able to. I think that should be made clear before any other commentary in his absence is passed, maybe inappropriately.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I was aware of this issue and I've looked at the Constitution and I wholeheartedly agree with both Councillor Jarman and Councillor Brodie. The Constitution, it seems to me, is quite clear that all groups have the right to put forward both an alternative budget and also amendments to the budget. And there can be no doubt about that. The words used are alternative budget and amendments. My understanding is there was an attempt by the statutory officers to interpret alternative budget for an amendment to the budget. There was no basis, in my view, for that. And one of the statutory officers cited an act or some regulations, which I looked up, and there was no basis for relying on those regulations. The regulation simply said that it was the duty of the administration in power to present a budget, but it was silent about the right of anyone else to do so. And therefore, I didn't find that to be in the least bit convincing. In fact, I found it to be a rather unfortunate smokescreen. Our Constitution is clear, and in my view, it is within the realm of this committee to put forward a recommendation that the Constitution should be followed, and it's properly set out in paragraphs 1 to 7 of this paper. And of course, if we're wrong on that, then no doubt Cabinet will tell us. But it's perfectly proper for us to put forward a recommendation that the Constitution should be followed, and it's been dutifully set out in paragraphs 1 to 7. Thank you.
I think Councillor Quirk next.
I too believe that the interpretation that Councillor Jarman has listed is the correct interpretation of the Constitution. I think the Constitution is quite clear. And I think the LGA would support that. The issue about not supporting the administration's budget, the issue is not that you can't work together. The issue is that you have different strategic approaches. And if you've got a budget that is based on a strategy that you fundamentally disagree with, you can't support that budget. And therefore, when this isn't just a little bit here and there, it is some fundamental things about the way that the administration is working. The only way to really address that is to have an alternate budget that is based upon alternate interpretations, alternate strategies. So it's very reasonable to have an alternate budget. The Constitution allows for an alternate budget, and any blockage of the process to doing that in terms of access to the information, access to each other's views on policies and how we might achieve things, but up to the point of the information that should be available in terms of forming the budget, that should be equally available to all members. And that it appears to be now, but it has been slow coming.
Councillor Love.
Thank you, Chair. Say this every time. We are a people's council. And what we've got is party political in terms of the split, in terms of developing budgets. What should happen is that we should all be locked in this room, heads banged together, and we produce one budget that we can all subscribe to. And that is the problem, is that we've become so party politically divided through decades, not just about what's happening here, through decades. I've got no problems with people putting in amendments and alternatives, but the principle is working together. And we clearly aren't working together for the better good of the island when it comes to budgets, because we're all divided. Now, I do agree, absolutely agree, that the information should be there for everybody. And I don't know who's responsible for that. And I'm not going to cast any aspersions as to who's responsible for that, but it needs to be sorted one way or another. The point is that why do we need alternative budgets if we can all sit in a room, and even though we come from different philosophies, sense and sensibility, particularly at a time where there isn't hardly any room for manoeuvre in terms of what we produce as a budget because things are so difficult. I do agree that actually we can't really debate anything because we haven't got the people here who can answer the questions. I do absolutely agree with that. But again, I just don't understand. For me, I'm an independent. I'll work with whoever. If you want to share your budget with me, I'll have a look at it. But budget things are not, they're not where I'm at. I haven't got that kind of analytical mind, but I'll give you a view as to what I think about it. And I do exactly the same for the independents. And I haven't seen that either. Okay. But the point is, this is what's wrong with the system. We're not working and delivering one view. We're fighting each other right from the word go. We'll do this because it's politically expedient to do so, because we're independents, or because we're conservatives, or because liberals, because our party expects us to do so. Well, we're not elected. Once we're elected, that party political stuff should stay in the cupboard where it belongs, and we should work for the people of this island. And that's what we're not doing. And everybody's to blame for that. I'm not pointing fingers in anyone. We're all to blame for that. And I say it every time.
Councillor Mosdale.
So one, I think we need to move on because we don't have the relevant people to here to talk about budgets. We could bicker about this forever, and I'd also want to say, I want to be on your list, the first person to speak on the next item. I've got my name down and I've got my prep. So I want my name down first, please. Just saying. Get in there first. I don't think that this is actually political. I think it's really good to have alternatives and people to be able to share different ideas. And I think full council is the place to share that, because actually we are elected, all of us, to represent our residents. So they need to know that we have a view and we can give an alternative. I've never been into a business meeting before where everyone's going, do you know what, we're all going to agree with each other right now. Actually, you need to have different ideas to look and open that discussion. We're not here as a load of lemmings who are all suddenly going to agree with each other. We need to have the right information to be able to form some ideas and decent budgets so we can all look at it and go, I'm not being funny, the Alliance might look at some of the stuff we're doing, go, do you know what, that's amazing. We might look at some of theirs and go, that's amazing. But we need to have this in a public arena where you had that open and honest discussion. Goes back to what you say, Carl, that you shouldn't have things behind closed doors. We need to have alternative budgets, alternative ideas, and then that open and free discussion on the budget night, get an extra hour for it to bun fight. So that's what it, and I want to be first on the next item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdell. Councillor Redrow.
I think something that we can all agree on is that proper scrutiny and access to information just hasn't happened for this. And this discussion tonight has been more about us venting our frustration with that than actually achieving anything in terms of scrutiny. And regardless of someone's reason for not being here, it's disappointing that we don't have anyone we can ask questions to.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Redrow. Nothing's been presented is the problem. Look, I don't think it's this committee's role to interpret. I will come back to you, Councillor Jarman, to interpret the Constitution, but I'm very sympathetic to all the points that have been made. I wonder whether the best course of action is to ask the officers a response, I guess, from Mr. Potter and Mr. Ward that addresses Councillor Jarman's concerns in items 1 to 7. And confirmation that they have, and they're satisfied they have shared everything that they have been required to share. And we get that in writing. And I know, Councillor Jarman, you may feel that that's not what you wanted, but a written response and confirmation in reply to you and this committee to address those issues, I think might have value, together with the comments that have been made by committee members, which I think support broadly the concerns you have. But please come back, Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased with the view of the committee this evening. Everything that I've heard endorses what I've said and endorses the interpretation of the Constitution that we've got there and the need for clarity on the Constitution. So I would be very pleased if the 3 statutory officers would do as you say and would now write back to us agreeing with those 7 points and continue to work with us as we are entitled to in the Constitution, by providing us with all access and all means to the information that's necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Your screen has opened up, so I assume you want to speak. But I'm hoping there is no issue with you and others responding to those points in the fullest possible way and trying to address the overriding issue that Councillor Jarman has.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. We'll take it away and give that response. A lot of sort of work has been gone on relation to this. Clearly, the democratic implications are vital. Information supplied to members is vital. The fact that budget proposals are required to be put forward by the executive is indeed, as Councillor Spink set down in legislation. I understand that access is being granted by directors to relevant information, and obviously, as I think one of the councillors already said tonight, clearly we can't portray the confidences of particular groups, etc., but information to facilitate members in their discussions and in their formulation of proposals is obviously sensible. But we'll take it away. We'll clarify what needs still to be clarified, and we'll report back if that's okay.
Thank you. And just for formality, can I take it that's a decision of this committee? Councillor Lever's got his hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just need to clarify. I'm happy with those questions to be posed to Mr. Potter, but I feel like Councillor Jarman, as a non-committee member, is putting words in our mouths as a committee. I'm not confirming that that's my interpretation of what's going on, because I don't know.
No,
Okay, let me be clear. I think a very good point. Let me be clear. What I'm suggesting this committee is asking of Mr. Potter and others is to take no view on whether the constitution has been followed. I don't think we have anywhere near enough information to be able to do that, and I'm not sure it's our role. And that we ourselves are not seeking to interpret the constitution. But I think in relation to items 1 to 7, that back page of the sheet we have, is so far as they're able, the officers able to provide a written response, please, to this committee, addressing all the points in there. Clearly, there are some points in there that are simply not a question for officers. And I will make one caveat in the middle of item 4. It suggests that the statutory officers have wrongly claimed something in relation to the cabinet. I'm not suggesting this committee says that that has taken place, but that point, please, to be addressed by the statutory officers. Is that enough for you, Councillor Lever?
Yeah, my issue was with the words that were endorsing, and that is not what I'm doing with that wording.
So just to clarify, and for the minutes, there is no endorsement of a view by this committee, but there's certainly a keenness, and indeed it's our decision and our request to the officers that those points be responded to as articulated in points 1 to 7, not necessarily the preamble, points 1 to 7, the back sheet of what we've got in front of us. Yeah, Councillor Love.
Yeah.
In a timely way, and I would ask within 2 weeks.
It must be much less than that if I could, Chairman. Sorry.
Councillor Jarman, sorry, Councillor Jarman.
Could I, there's no reason, there has been, as the monitoring officer said, extensive discussion on this. And I see no reason at all why they should not confirm or otherwise provide evidence of disagreement with those 7 points within seven days. That's by this time next week. That's very reasonable given everything that's gone on to date and the pressure we have to conclude the budget discussions.
Councillor Sping.
Yes, I support that, please, that it's within 7 days. I was going to say even less, but I'll agree to 7. We've already missed, as a result of information not being made available, and Councillor Jarman can give you greater detail, but we've already now missed opportunities for, I think, in respect of council tax, writing that portion of the budget and other areas, because the dates for doing that have now passed. So time is really of the essence, and if it could be done in a maximum of 7 days and preferably sooner, so that we don't miss any more deadlines. Otherwise, our alternative budget will be a shadow of what it could be.
Fine, the request from this committee within 7 days as a request. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. I'm seeing nods around the room. Yeah, yeah. In fact, I'm gonna ask for a raise of hands to show this committee endorses what we've just asked. Raise of hands. All those in favour. Look, we've got unanimous approval. Thank you very much. Agenda item. It's now 9. Pre-decision scrutiny on future governance. An update since this agenda was put together. The chairman of the council, Councillor Critchison, I understand, has decided not to put this on full council agenda as a substantive motion. And in fact, that agenda has now been published and it's on the agenda as an update and not a full motion. I am minded, therefore, not to have the full scrutiny debate that I wanted to have at this meeting. It's with genuine reluctance, but I think that if we defer this specifically by a month, not into the long grass, by a month to come back on our agenda in February, I would like to have a response, a detailed response from the chairman of the council as to why she took the decision to defer this. And I understand at a meeting yesterday, she was happy to have it on the agenda. And this is a unilateral decision. I'm sure it's within her gift, but a unilateral decision she made at the last minute, and I'd like a full response from her. Councillor Mosdell.
So I've spent an afternoon listening to a load of hoo-ha that felt really, really undemocratic. Can I make it clear that in this report that was going to full council was a simple vote? It wasn't discussing the great long report that Chris Potter did, which actually need to do some sort of check and challenge on that report at some time, because it was a huge report, it came out just before Christmas. But actually the recommendations that came from the committee, which Councillor Lever was on, the recommendation was to go to full council for a very simple vote. The very simple vote, as listed in here, is that the Isle of Wight Full Council will move to a political proportionally committee system for its annual meeting on the 15th of May 2024. And the recommendation was that there would be a progress report on March 2024 to full council, and then that we would move to that system on May 2024. The whole world's gone mad, because that's all we were going to do. We were going to go to full council and we were going to say, this group has met, we've all put lots of time and energy into it. I was convinced at the very beginning, so I wanted other people from my group to go who were a bit on the sideline, did they or not? But that group spent a lot of time meeting, discussing, and came to a very clear decision that they wanted this to go to full council to vote, should we move to a committee system or a cabinet system? And then for the officers to put together how that would be done, and then that progress report to come back to March. Now, we're not allowed to even have that vote. We're not allowed to even say, this group has met, and it's a case of how many people in full council want it to be a committee system or a cabinet system. We're not asking you the detail. We're just asking, is this the majority voice that this council wants to move to a committee system? We have now had that choice taken away from us, and that cannot be by any stretch of the imagination democratic or right that that has happened. A simple vote. Do we want a cabinet system? Do we want a committee system? Do we want to send the officers off to do it? So kicking it into the long grass, and it is kicking it into the long grass, because full council's next week, and it should have that simple vote. And whatever happens, little Miss Gobby here is going to make sure that we know that we should be having that vote. Even if it is, I override that full council at the end and say, come on then, let's have a show of hands. Who agrees, who doesn't? Because that was the majority of that group, and people worked really hard on it. It should not be blocked from full council to have that simple, do you agree, do you not, send the officers to do it, crack on with it. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Lever and then Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. I just feel like I need to clarify, because I was named out of everybody, and Councillor Mosdell was looking at me throughout.
Because you were there and you agreed.
I did, and that's the point I'm going to make.
Yeah.
I did agree with it, and I wasn't part of the decision that the chair has made. So I'm not sure why there's focus on me here, because I've not made.
Should say we actually agree with it, Councillor Luciani. We all agreed
Yeah,
on
yeah.
it, didn't we? Thought it was brilliant.
My name is on that paper. I was part of that group. I voted for it. I'm happy to have that vote when it's appropriate. I don't know the reasons the chair has made for that, so it'd be good for us to understand that better before we make assumptions about it being blocked, or because it's been deferred, is my understanding. It's not never coming. So I'm all I'm getting at is we need to know the reasons why, right? And then we can make comment.
Understanding is.
I agree, Councillor Lever, and that's why I'm minded not to scrutinise something that's not going to come before full council next time, but instead ask the question of the chair of the council in a written response to this committee. I'm going to bring in Councillor Brodie very quickly and Councillor Redrup, and I think unless there's disagreement from the committee, that's the way we should proceed. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair, and I chaired the group that was established as a result of the decision unanimously of the July full council regarding looking into future governance with a view to moving to a committee system. A lot of work was done on that, and to be frank, I was flabbergasted when I got the full council agenda today to find out that any decision had been removed from full council. People said that you're saying, Chair, that you'd like to know the reasons. The reasons are in the monitoring officer's 18-page document circulated 1 week before Christmas Day that some of us only had an opportunity to look at last week. They're also in another email that he backed up with on the 4th of January. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the pressure has come through the monitoring officer, but also from probably, and I'll say it now, the cabinet member responsible for corporate functions, sorry, who has interestingly left just at the start of this item. There are many of us in the room who were on that group. It wasn't just Joe Lever, it was Claire Mosdell, Chris Quirk, Ian Ward, Chris Jarman, myself. Carol Lucioni was on it, and she's left earlier as well. Jonathan Bacon was the only member of that group who opposed all the way through any move to a different form of system. Can I just say that I say that I've been on this council a long time. I've experienced some chairing over the year. I've been the chair myself. I had my own style. I experienced somebody who was the chair twice, who was the worst chair I've ever known. But not one of them has ever made this sort of decision, this unilateral decision, in the face of what is quite clearly the democratic will of the majority of people of this council. That's what's worrying people, that this was going to go through, because people are persuaded by the arguments. So democracy has been removed by Councillor Critches and the chair of the council, and I find that extremely disappointing. I would suggest to you that we should be seeking something in writing from the chair of the council as to why she's made this reason within days, because certainly, and I mean, Councillor Mosdell is always extremely articulate. I will also be protesting long and hard at full council next week because it's so anti-democrat. I've spent my whole life fighting against such actions, and I find it appalling. And I will sing loud and hard about it for as long as I possibly can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Councillor Redroy.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to echo what Councillor Modsall, Lever and Brodie have all said. On my very first full council meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about cooperation and cross-party working, and I feel that the working group has evidenced that, and to have a decision that's been made very close to full council without any explanation like this, I find quite shocking. So I think I would like any question that goes to the chair to be quite specific, and I'd like to know what advice was given to her and by whom that maybe led her to take that decision.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Redrow. Councillor Spink.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that once again, I agree with Councillor Brodie on this. I'm very concerned really by this entire meeting tonight. It does seem to me that the function of corporate scrutiny has been undermined by no one from the cabinet being here to address an agenda item, namely finances. I think the next item on our agenda, which was budget amendments, the position is that the democracy, in my opinion, has been undermined by, and I have to say this, the statutory officers' wrongful interpretation of the Constitution. And then finally, democracy has been undermined tonight by the fact that we can't consider this agenda item in full, partly now because the relevant cabinet member has left, but also because the item's no longer on the agenda. Items on an agenda by the chair are not supposed to be political decisions, and I fear that this is one. Items on the agenda are supposed to be put on there fairly And it seems to me that it is abundantly clear that there has been a decision not to put this on the agenda for a combination of political reasons and, as I understand it, advice from our monitoring officer, with which I do not agree.
Yeah, and can I just add to that? I haven't had a communication with the leader of the council. He's not at the meeting either. I think he might have been on screen earlier, but I can't see him.
Now.
Can't see him now. So you know, clearly
Most of the cabinet.
clearly there's not huge stamina amongst some cabinet members. Councillor Lever.
Yeah, can we, I feel like at times this meeting, and I'm here as a corporate scrutiny member, I want to scrutinise the corporate functions of this council properly. And I feel at times the language and the accusations have kind of bordered beyond what I would expect of this committee. I feel like if somebody's not here to give an answer, you might have your own opinion on why that is, but without the relevant context, can we not make assumptions and just go off the evidence that we have at hand, please?
I agree. I think the problem is, Councillor Lever, that the cabinet attendance at these meetings is pretty poor. And we are here to scrutinise the executive, who happen to be all Alliance members, but it's the executive we're scrutinising.
Yeah, I agree. And again, just I feel like people are dropping Alliance and the 13 and a lot of times here. If we're unhappy as a committee and the cabinet aren't here to represent, let's feed that back formally and can we just keep it at that level, please, instead of I feel like we're getting a bit conspiratorial at times, and I don't think it's a good for the reputation of this committee.
Councillor Love.
I think I'm the only one here that can actually answer some of the questions that have been raised, because I was at the agenda setting yesterday, along with Mr. Potter, who's the only other person who can answer the questions. There was quite a lot of legal debate about the process that took place yesterday, and advice was given to our chairperson, of which we bounced that off each other, and the other officers pretended that. This is not a simple question, I'm sorry. This is the biggest question. This is the biggest issue that's happened for the people, the way that we govern the island. It is the biggest decision that this council will make. And whilst I support a move towards or a move to committee, this document is willfully lacking in a whole range of things. Now, it is a simple document. I agree that. It lacks a lot of detail, significant detail, upon which I cannot make a decision without knowing what that means for me, my community and others. So there are tons and tons of questions that I could go into about this document moving forwards. In principle, I'm in favour, but it is not a simple question. There are legalities. I, for one, am insistent that this goes to the people of the island. This is the biggest decision for consultation. It's not in here. It hasn't been done. It needs to be done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but those things, I need to know that the 14 committees that are set up, that there's enough people to be able to resource them, that there's enough staffing to be able to resource them. None of those questions have been done. And so I can't say yes to this either now or in the future until I know what the financial implication of this change is, which might be zero. I don't know those questions, okay? But none of that work has been done to inform a debate for me to be able to say, yes, that is what we should do on the 24th. Now, the advice that was given, and Councillor Potter is here to say that, is in actual fact, when we left the meeting yesterday, we felt reasonably that it could go forward for a discussion. I said that I wanted it to be a discussion rather than a recommendation. That was my feeling from the, so I own my own statements without pointing the finger to anybody else. Now, what's happened between then and today, I didn't know that that had been taken off the agenda till I walked through the door, but I respect the fact that the advice given was to do that. And when in that meeting, I will own my own statements, I felt that it should be taken off because there was not sufficient information and it was actually decided that it wouldn't be taken off.
Councillor Love,
So that gives you an explanation of what happened at that meeting.
thank you. But I think we're all agreed the chair of the council is accountable for her own decision in this, and it was her decision, and that's why we need a written response from her. I thank you very much. I want to bring this to a conclusion. Two very short points from the councillors with their hands up, Councillor Mosdell and Councillor Quirk, and then I think I'll put it to the committee that we asked for a written response.
So in all the time I've been a councillor, and I get that you want to make an informed decision, etc. But we've always been able to have that discussion in full council in public view, and then Councillor Love's opinion and others' opinion would be formed on the basis of how we moved forward. But this feels like we can't move forward, and a delay, because actually we should have been able to have our hands up and at that vote that the majority of the council wanted us to work on instructing for that information to be prepared on how this would work in a further, but the actual principle of it being democratic, and that's the way that we would like to move forward, is what we should be voting on. But now we can't do that because it's not on the agenda.
Councillor Quirk, very brief, please.
This isn't a decision that we have approved a final way forward. It's the decision in principle that we want to go to a committee system and to then action officers to move us to that position. If we're not in a position to go with it come April, May time, then we don't have to make the decision then to finally approve it. I think it's a total red herring on the part of the argument being given that you can't go ahead now because we haven't dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. That's a process that you need to go through. But there's a ridiculous process to go through if you haven't actually made the decision in principle for the direction of travel. And I think this feels more like an administration trying to hang on to power for another year than it does feel like a real political.
I don't want to open this debate up now. Councillor Brodie, was the please, Councillor Love, please. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Brodie, very briefly, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Firstly, personal explanation. Councillor Love said that the report was willfully lacking in detail. I refute that on behalf of the group who took a decision on a very early stage that a report wouldn't be some 18 pages, as we got from the monitoring officer just before Christmas, would be a short report giving the skeleton of what we were recommending, that the detail of that would be decided in the 4-month period before May 2024, and that we needed to make the in principle decision, something called the section 9K something or other, I can't remember the exact detail in the legislation, has to be put in place if we're to change the system in May this year. If we, now that we can't do it in January, Chair, it's put back a year. It's as simple as that. The will of the majority of people on this council has been stymied by one person. Finally, I would just say it's interesting that Councillor Love, who is no longer a cabinet member, seems to know what they discussed and what they did discuss. Thank you. What didn't discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So is this committee agreed that we should ask the chairman of the council to give a full explanation of her decision not to include this item on the agenda?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, fine. All those in favour? Yes.
Could we ask for that to be provided no later than midday on Friday, the 12th of January, this Friday, because there are deadlines pending on the submissions of public questions and other matters to the committee, which are expire at 5 o'clock on Friday, the 12th. So if we can have that in detail circulated by midday on Friday, that will give 5 hours for people to review that and respond to it. Thank you, Chair.
I don't have a problem with including that. The rest of the committee, you happy? It's a request. It's not we can't mandate her. Yeah, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 10, confidentiality. to consider a report on confidentiality in terms of the council's decision-making process and the council's protective marking policy. Pages 65 to 74. So this item has had a fairly interesting sort of lengthy background to it, which sort of encapsulates, I think, different issues within the broader heading of confidentiality. One example, and I just give it as an example, that it is one that has come up on a number of occasions, was this committee was asked to scrutinise 2 days before Cabinet the proposal to dispose of Kingston Marine Park to then unknown buyers, or that the committee was not made aware of who the buyers would be. There'd been some conversation with individual councillors who knew the identity of the buyers, or at least the sector they worked in. But the committee was told that it was confidential because heads of terms had not been agreed, and the buyers did not want, or the council and the buyers did not want early disclosure of that prior to heads of agreement being signed. 2 days later, the Cabinet took their decision, and within 24 hours, the prospective buyers had done a press release and a full splash in the county press. Nearly a year later, no heads of terms have been signed. So that clearly was not a sensible, valid, or reasonable excuse not to give more detail to this committee. And we were told we couldn't even know the sector that the prospective buyers were working in. We weren't looking for sort of names particularly. So that opened up a whole conversation around confidentiality. There were other email chains in relation to a different topic where a document was marked confidential and sent to some councillors and not others. And the implication was a councillor couldn't forward it to a colleague. There was then a much wider issue whether the term confidential is being used a little too widely and whether it's being used as a casual way of pushing back awkward conversations. I'm very grateful to the chief executive who's been looking at this and who I've raised the issue with on a number of occasions. So you've got the item in front of you. It's quite heavy on law and regulation, as you'd imagine it to be. I think it possibly doesn't quite capture that sort of cut, that there's something in the middle of regulation, law, and the way the council communicates with itself as between officers, executive, and scrutiny committees that's not necessarily captured in this note. I wasn't in the chair when that particular agenda item came up, and we haven't had something like it since. I don't know what my predecessor asked in terms of information to go into reports, and I'm not going to second guess or criticise him. Certainly, if I was in that position and a similar item came back, I would be pushing back very heavily on any suggestion that certain items could only be told to Cabinet and not corporate scrutiny. And I'd be asking for a meeting in private if that's what it took, so that we could see it and the public couldn't, if there was a legitimate reason why it couldn't be in the public domain, but it could be in the councillors, scrutiny councillors could see it. That's my own background to a paper you've got. Any questions, views, thoughts, comments?
Mine's
Councillor
just sort of a comment because I've got to shoot in a minute. I apologise for that, and I've got another meeting to go to. Having once upon a time, feels like a million years ago now, been on Cabinet, we would actually have sections of scrutiny that we could bring papers to, that we would actually share the purple papers so that scrutiny could see those purple papers. They were made clear that they wouldn't be emailed to people, they wouldn't be part of anything, that they would be posted to them separately, and they would be discussed on a confidential note. The actual not disclosing of information wasn't withheld from scrutiny, it was just made clear that they were going to have a separate discussion on it, and it wouldn't be part of an open pack. We're all councillors, we're all elected to have these discussions. It does feel that it's becoming more and more of a closed shop, and the freedom of discussions of information is becoming tighter and not being shared so freely, and I don't quite understand why. So yeah, this is all sort of full of lots of legal jargon, and I'm sure I could send it. My daughter is a corporate lawyer, but she'd translate it at some point or say, why the hell are you discussing this in a council meeting? What should be is, where is that level of trust? Why can't you have those discussions? Maybe we're just excluding the press. That's what we don't seem to do anymore. We don't seem to be giving the generosity of being able to share information between councillors, and maybe just excluding the press for 10, 15 minutes while those discussions are held. And I don't get how or when we got to that point. And at this point, I will leave. But we should all trust each other to a point.
Wendy Pereira, Chief Executive.
Thank you. And before she disappears out the door, thank you to Councillor Mosdale for raising that point, because I think she's hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the issues that I've been unpicking in terms of bringing this paper forward, and that is the difference between something being debated in public and something being exempt. And what I've seen is a move to exactly that, where confidentiality and exemption have been confused with then cabinet scrutiny, other members not being able to debate issues. So I think part of the premise of this paper is that we get back to that rigorous approach of exempt papers can be prepared. It means that you have the meeting in the right place, and it's not necessarily a debate in public, but your purple papers are then available for discussion. I also think, for me, there's something around when we're looking at what is exempt information, being really clear that it's exempt. And whilst there may be some occasions where information is exempt, and that's for good, reasons in terms of disclosure of commercial confidentiality and other matters, I think we can be better at providing information in reports. That means that what goes into an exempt category is exactly that. It is only the information that needs to be exempt, but the covering report can be more descriptive and have more narrative about the decision that's being made.
Yeah, thank you. And some assistance, I think, with how we legitimately get around the problem, which very often might be that it can't go into the public domain at that time, but we do need to allow for proper scrutiny at the same time. Councillor Spink.
Thank you. Well, I've been involved with this issue for some time. The information that I've been given by the monitoring officer is that if something is ruled to be exempt, then, because I asked if it would be possible for, if it's exempt information or confidential information, but the correct term is exempt, I've asked whether or not it could be considered by, for example, corporate scrutiny, but corporate scrutiny is sitting in camera without the public present. And the monitoring officer's advice to me is that that can't take place, that if it's exempt, then corporate scrutiny isn't entitled to see it. So on that basis, it seems to me that this report is quite important, and that we need a system whereby if something is considered to be exempt and can't therefore be in the public realm and can't therefore be examined by corporate scrutiny, even in camera, we need a system whereby the monitoring officer's reasons are given to the committee in writing, setting out why it's exempt, what category of exempt material it is. And also we need, which isn't mentioned in this report, my understanding is that even though something is exempt, it is still subject to a question of public interest balance. So it's not because it's exempt category, it doesn't automatically mean that it can't be scrutinized. it's a question then, if once it goes into the category of exempt material, is the interest in the privacy of the exempt material outweighed by the interest of the public in knowing that information? Now, that doesn't seem to appear in this report, that test at all, and that's my understanding. I may be wrong, but my understanding of the legal situation. So I think we need, A, to clarify that, B, to have a report when exempt information is claimed, as I say, setting out the category of exempt information, and also that the public interest balance has been applied and decided that there is not sufficient public interest in knowledge. Thank you.
I can see Mr. Potter has appeared on screen. Did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I think, as has been said already this evening, I think it's important that if information is capable of being put into the public realm, it should be. Where information is in the wider public interest to be regarded as exempt information, for so long as it remains exempt information, then obviously it should stay exempt. But as Councillor Spink has rightly said, there is the test clearly that, which is an ongoing duty to ensure that any information which is categorised as exempt, it only stays exempt for so long as it's in the wider public interest for that exemption to be maintained. As soon as it's not justifiable to maintain its exempt status, then obviously the information should be released. I think in terms of an explanation as to why information or parts of information is exempt, I think that's certainly something which I've put a sentence to in the report, in that those who are actually hands-on in relation to particular information, they need to be explaining why it is exempt, so I can take a view on it, and then obviously subsequently, if need be, yourselves as corporate scrutiny or other people can then be satisfied that the right approach was taken at the material time. The other final point to make is we're dealing with rights of councillors as opposed to a distinction where information may be, requested. And obviously, if you're fulfilling a statutory function and you need information to fulfil that statutory function, then, as I think Councillor Mosdell's mentioned in the past, then information has been given on a private basis, so fellow councillors can actually discuss the matter in private where that need arises for something to be discussed in private. But the starting point should be to release the information. Thank you.
Councillor Love.
Thank you for that. I do agree with Councillor Spinks in pretty much. I think some of the real issues started for me when we got the Data Protection Act implemented, about what information we are allowed to have and to pass on and how we can communicate that. And I think there was a clearer system before. There's no doubt about it that the purple papers did work. I don't know why they've stopped. I've got no explanation as to why. But anyway, the system's changed for one reason or another, or perhaps it's just time. I don't know. The point is that it's very complicated. And the reason I remember the island roads issues about how much a square foot of tarmac cost and all of those things. It's not always about what the council wants. Actually, sometimes it's about what the clients want. And that in this case, if they choose to release that data, then they've made a choice to release that data. But we can't release data unless they actually say that it's appropriate for us to do so. And if we're trying to, for instance, I'm just using it, to sell that piece at Kingston Marine to a client who's saying, we'll do this deal with you, but you're not to expose this, then that responsibility is held with them now, and not necessarily us, even if we want to know that. So it is complicated. So I agree with you that getting some sort of clarity around this. Again, I go back to, I said it earlier, meetings in private. I do not like meetings in private. I think, if it's good enough for behind the scenes, then it's good enough for the public to know, unless there's a really specific reason, like the Data Protection Act, on names are being talked about, individuals, etc. But it needs a clear explanation. And I think that bit of work will take a little bit of time, if I'm really honest about it. But I do agree with you. We need to be able to do that. The other thing is to remember that we were not protected as councillors under our own litigation rules. That if with that Island Roads contract, if I'd have signed on the document to take to look at the documents, and then any one individual who had signed disclosed it, we were all culpable. I could have lost my home, and those are the things that we need to get to the bottom of in terms of confidentialities, so that we're very clear. Sorry for waffling.
The report is for noting. It's clearly not as you know, it doesn't cover every aspect, but frankly, I think you probably write several hundred pages on confidentiality. But what it does say is helpful, I think. In the future, I think there's plainly obviously a role for scrutiny chairs and chair of this committee if a gender item comes up for a cabinet decision, that the chair, through the agenda setting and putting together the papers, pushes back on notions of confidentiality, etc. And I think, I'm not sure we can create a document to remind someone of that. That's inherent within the duties of a chair. So I'm minded to say thank you and note that particular report. Fine, I see some nods. Okay. Thank you. And I think that takes us on to the final item, 11, members' question time. Are there any members' questions? No, there's a question from Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a question of clarification, really. You mentioned in one of the earlier items that I'm paraphrasing here, you hardly ever get cabinet members at these meetings. I'm just wondering what evidence you had for that. 'Cause I've just gone through the past sort of dozen or so meetings, and the majority of the meetings, you had the majority of the cabinet here, and I think by convention, cabinet members turn up when they have a particular paper to be able to answer, to be scrutinised on, which is quite right too. I myself always come unless I'm, away or ill or something like that. So I think it's really, really important that cabinet members are here. I do agree with that. But I think we've actually got quite a good record. So just like if you wanted to check the data yourself, and maybe you may come to a different conclusion, maybe just seems this evening frustrated because Councillor Stevens wasn't here, and as you heard, that was through family issues that he wasn't here. But I hope that you really do. I feel that we actually, as a cabinet, do support this committee quite well, because I think it's really important for me to be here and my colleagues well. So when we have to reach cabinet on Thursday, we're able to make good informed decisions from listening to everything's been debated.
Councillor Jones-Evans, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify what I mean. And for the public record, this is a meeting of Corporate Scrutiny Committee. We're less than 2.5 hours in, and we only have 2 members of the cabinet in the room, albeit there were more earlier. I do have a problem when I don't have apologies from a cabinet member when there's an item on the agenda for whatever reason. And I do have a problem when the council leader is absent, and I accept that the council leader was online earlier, at least for part of the meeting. But going back over the last 1.5 years, the council leader has very often not been present. But I'm very happy to acknowledge that you are an absolute stalwart, Councillor Jones-Evans, and are here at every meeting, as is Councillor Fuller, and it's no surprise they're the only 2 cabinet members still in the room. So thank you very much for your attendance, both of you. I hope that clarifies my own comments. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments that were made earlier on, and I'm quite happy to take that back to members of the cabinet, and I hope that in the future we will all be here. I think one of the unfortunate issues that we have is that in the past we have been looking at cabinet meetings that follow, and I think there has been a much greater requirement from cabinet members being here. The problem with me is if I don't turn up, I'm wondering what people are saying about me. So it's that paranoia that means that I come along to these meetings. But I enjoyed the debate, and I enjoy hearing what has come back, and I will make sure that it goes back to members of the cabinet. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Whatever motivates you to be here, I'm glad you're here. No, thank you. And clearly not 100% attendance of all cabinet members at all time. Plainly, if there is an agenda item that's not there, but at fullest attendance as possible, particularly if there's an agenda item. Thank you, Councillor Redrup.
I obviously haven't been on this committee for very long, but I do thank you both for always being here, and you are always here. I've been to 3 meetings now, and in all 3 meetings, the cabinet member for a specific agenda item either hasn't been there or has left before that agenda item has come up. Obviously, my reference pool is very small. It's only 3 meetings, but that's my first 3 meetings, and it's happened every time. So I do share the frustration.
Thank you. Councillor Love.
It's a final silly question, really. Can we please have some more heating in this room? I'm absolutely frozen in future. Even if it's an electric fire. I mean, look at even the press are curled up in the corner over there. No typing, can't touch the keyboards. Please, please, please. Sorry, I know it's a silly question, but
Good point, Councillor Love. I agree. I put my coat on halfway through the meeting. Unless there's anything else, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And that's the end of the meeting.